So we decided to let the panelists introduce themselves. And so we're just going to start by going, I think I'm going to try to do this in reverse alphabetical order by first name, and let people tell you basically who they are and what they do. And then we're going to pick into those questions.
I'm Raven Caruso-Loaiza. I come from the Dayton, Ohio Mediation Response Unit. And what else do you want to know about us? I come from lots of experience. I have experience in law enforcement, as well as prior to this position, I was the director of victim services and specifically over a rape crisis and anti-human trafficking division for a decade. So I come with a wealth of knowledge and information, and this just fit just perfectly with this program that we have.
Thank you. Now I think I'm going to get this right. Ivy, you're next.
Good morning. Thank you so much to Christy and Barry both for inviting me here. My name is Ivy Lee. I serve as the Public Safety and Victims' Rights Policy Advisor to Mayor London Breed in San Francisco. Prior to joining her administration, I practiced as an attorney for a number of years. Back when the first human trafficking legislation was passed in 2000. So my project was to represent and create a system of care for trafficking survivors. So that work kind of led me into kind of a progressive political arena. And that is what I did after I left that project. Passing policies and creating ideas and implementing them, like the Free City College program, which was the first free tuition-free program in the country, as well as, for example, like hospitality workers and making sure that they have job security once ownership or management changes, as well as the Fair Chance Act, which was actually prior to President Obama passing the ban the box legislation in San Francisco. We did it a few years ahead of time. So that is some of the work that I've been doing. And now with my colleague who's in the audience, Catherine Shu, we are redesigning the public safety space in San Francisco. And I think we're going to talk a little bit more about that later.
Good. Christy, I think you're next in reverse.
Yeah, well, you know who I am and what I'm doing now. I'll just add to that I got into this work pretty much right after law school back in 1995, working with the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. I began doing this work looking at conditions of jails and prisons, which very quickly led me to wonder how people get into these places, and they clearly didn't belong there. And so that brought me to policing, and I spent a lot of time investigating police departments and trying to negotiate and develop remedies in the form of consent decrees with the occasional litigation in there in departments all across the country. And I left there in 2017. I also was the monitor of the Oakland Police Department for a few years. And I was in private civil rights practice. And then I left DOJ for the second time in 2017 and came here to Georgetown Law.
Thank you. Aaliyah?
Good morning, all. My name is Aaliyah Hinton Williams, and I am from Rochester, New York. And I have been serving in human services in various capacities for many years now. My journey started off in 1992 when my 16-year-old brother Raleigh was killed in front of our family's home, walking home from Bible college. After his death, I got very heavily involved in community, youth, and family work. I continued that work for some years, and then in 2018, my eldest sister, Tracy, was killed in a domestic violence incident. And following her death, a couple of years later, the city of Rochester created the Crisis Intervention Services Unit, and I was promoted to manager of that unit. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here, Lee, and for sharing all of that. I'm going to start with you, Christy, and invite you to say more about your trajectory to this room. You have been, for most of your career, as you said, a police reformer. You have been on the enforcement side of it from the Department of Justice. I know it is a passion of yours, and I just want to know how this piece of it, alternative response, came to be part of the portfolio that you consider what needs to happen in the world.
Yeah, I think there's three things. First, I think it's important to recognize that a lot of this work is spurred by high-profile incidents of police misconduct. It shouldn't be that way. We should be starting this work because it's more effective and more humane. But the fact is that it's often because police do something terrible or awful, and people think, why were the police even there? Right? We've seen that time and time again. And I think that is an important dynamic to keep in mind as we're doing this work. It'd be nice if we could shift away from that reactive approach. But for me, what really connects the work of trying to transform or reform the police to the kind of what we're calling alternative first response stems in part from my investigation and involvement in police departments all across the country of all different types, large, small, sheriff's departments, municipal, state, and all of them, I saw the same dynamic. An over-reliance on policing for public safety and community well-being. And not just an over-reliance on policing, but a normalization of that over-reliance. So it becomes to be seen as just, of course, we are sending the police because a mother is having a dispute with her daughter over the remote control. Oh, there's a homeless person who is sleeping on the stoop of your business. Clearly, the police should be called to that. And I could go on, and Barry gave some examples, and we all know. Right, all of these, not just people who are in mental health crisis or behavioral crisis, but a broad panoply of situations where it became clear to me over time that we shouldn't have the police in these situations. So that's been very important to me and to my evolving understanding. The other dynamic is that police have been increasingly involved in order maintenance, right? And if you look at one of the really influential articles about that, Broken Windows by George Kelly and Wilson, they, in that article, explicitly condone the police violating the law in order to maintain order. And they even say that communities want the police to violate the law. They say that communities want police to, quote, kick ass, right? That article, it's chilling when you think that, given how influential the article has been, that they explicitly condone the police violating the law. And many judges and political leaders have tacitly condoned that approach to policing. And that public order maintenance, right? The order maintenance sort of function of policing is almost entirely in the space of the work that should be done by people like you rather than the police. So there's a very direct link between the types of responsibilities we've given police and their persistent and tolerated, sometimes condoned, stepping over the line into illegality. And so I think it's impossible. Not only does it make sense from a community well-being and public safety perspective, but it's actually impossible, I believe, to ever have consistently lawful policing if we insist on having the police take such a central role in these order maintenance functions.
Thank you. So I want to now talk with some of the people doing the work and figure out what that's looking like as they do exactly what you have said ought to happen. I'm going to start with you, Aaliyah. So tell us about the genesis of your program, the person in crisis. Is that, yep. So tell us about the genesis of that, like why it seemed compelling to start it, and then some of the work you do, and then I want to ask you about how it's expanded because I know that it has.
Sure. So in 2020, we had a man in our community by the name of Daniel Prude who experienced a mental health crisis and was attended to by police officers. During that attending to, he was ultimately killed. And after Daniel Prude's death, our community demanded that we have law enforcement alternatives to mental health and behavioral health crises. Luckily, our former mayor and our city council agreed with that. And while also trying to add some other elements to human services for the city of Rochester, they decided to create the crisis intervention unit and bring in the person in crisis team as well as 2 other teams. So our unit was created directly in response to what the community asked for.
Tell us before we talk about the expansion, because I very much want to, and I think the theme of this panel is this is like head spinning for me, because, and Christy was talking about this, you first start reading about this and it is little pinpricks everywhere, and you might have a vision for where it should go, and you realize it's just going there way faster than you can even have a vision. It's just happening. And I want to dig into that with all the panelists. Tell us who are on the teams, though. I'm just curious.
Sure. So I usually talk about the teams in the order that they were created. The first team that was created was our homicide response team. That is a team that includes myself, clergy members, a social worker, and other community-based organizations who respond to every homicide scene that occurs in the city of Rochester. In 2021, we had 87 homicides, and in 2022, we had 76 homicides. And what we had learned over the years is that the community members needed support at those scenes. When you talk in terms of families and community, they don't know what's happening. They don't know what the next steps are. They don't know how to talk with officers. They may be angry, any number of things. So our teams go to that scene and we stay there with the families until the scene is completed. The second team that was created was the person in crisis team. And then our third team is our community support team, which technically already existed. Well, it was our victim assistance services team. We just absorbed it. So we now have the three teams.
And who staffs the person in crisis teams? Who staffs the person?
The person in the crisis team is staffed by emergency response social workers.
Got it. So, one of the things you told me when we first talked was that the call types, the call numbers to which you're responding has been expanding over time. And I wondered if you could say a word about how it's expanding, what's the new work, but also kind of the why. Like, how do you pick which call numbers to add? How do you sort of manage the growth?
Sure, I just need to consult my notes so that I stay on track as you have requested.
I've lost my notes, so if I get off track, I want you to let me know.
So yes, our call types have quadrupled in less than 2 years. And what happened was that when we initially started the team, we were only responding to 3 types of calls. They were all mental health. So that meant that any mental health calls that came into the Rochester Police Department, the PIC team was automatically co-dispatched on those calls. We're also able to respond alone if those calls are deemed appropriate, especially in terms of safety. And so over the past 2 years, we have very intentionally built a relationship with the police department. We've tried to develop respect and trust on both sides. It has not been easy. We have almost 800 officers. A large percentage were not interested in the PIC team, nor did they want our existence to move forward. But fortunately, we had the mayor on our end. And so we were able to say, here we are. So we did a lot of work initially, and we're still doing a lot of work to create, maintain, and cultivate those relationships. And what ended up happening was over time, our value was proven. And officers began to realize that, hey, we can call the PIC team out to calls that don't require law enforcement. We don't need law enforcement for substance use, homelessness, fire fatalities, domestic violence, youth and family issues. Those are better served by social workers, in particular the PIC team. And so we went from the 3 call types to 12. And it continues to expand because officers realize that their time could be better spent on other priority types of calls.
Can I ask you just one last question, which is, because we were talking about this last night. So when you respond, it's always co-response initially for the person in crisis team? Is that?
It is not.
Okay.
So when a call comes through, we are dispatched via 911, 211, 311, or 988. So a call can come in as a PIC alone call. And that means that the call has gone through a number of questions. And based on those questions, it is deemed safe for the PIC team to go alone. And so we are able to respond to those things alone. We do come in a city vehicle. We don't wear uniforms. We have no licensed sirens. We come to a scene and present as concerned community members who can assist you. Now, if a call comes in to 911 for RPD, that is automatically going to be a code dispatch. However, when we arrive to that scene, many times, again, if it is safe and appropriate, the officers will leave that scene to us. And then likewise, we are able to call in RPD if we need to at a call. So our model follows both processes.
Thank you. I think we'll go to Rochester next. I'm sorry, we're gonna go to Dayton next. We were just in Rochester. Raven runs the mediation response unit, and I want to ask her about that. But I just have to say before she does that I was so incredibly happy to learn that Dayton had a mediation response unit because my experience riding around police cars was that was the thing police spent such a large part of their day doing. And so tell us about the genesis.
Yes, exciting news, right? We are a program that developed after the murder of George Floyd and several others. In 2020, our mayor said, hey, we're going to put some money and some talks behind that. So they got a lot of different groups, a variety of groups together, 5 working groups together to work on police reform initiatives for the city. And there were 142 recommendations for change through that police reform. Some of those were, I don't want to say minor because they're important, but smaller policy changes. And then other things were program development. And one of those is that they wanted an alternative response to calls for conflict for the city of Dayton. Initially, we did not set out to handle mental health or behavioral health crisis calls. That was not the intention. We were to handle all of the other things that involve people in crises or people in conflict, but not weapons. We are unarmed. The unique thing is we do not co-respond. We respond strictly on our own, and we operate on the same computer and radio system as our police and fire, so that if we get to a scene and it's outside of the scope of practice, or maybe dispatch hasn't collected all of the information or it wasn't freely given, because it could say a neighbor dispute, and then you show up and you're like, whoa, what's going on here kind of thing. We also intend to look at the iceberg effect. So we come for this particular reason. And when police respond, they're here to address this and move on because they've got those higher acuity calls. Whereas we are focused a little bit more on what's under the surface, so we can address some of the longer term root causes of challenges. So if we're responding to a neighbor dispute and you get there and they're arguing over trash cans in the driveway and where they should be placed, and then you engage with them, and then you've got a whole slew, you've got 7 years of challenges between neighbors to address. So just like Rochester, we started out with a few call types, 7 or 9 to be exact, and we're up to 21 different call types now. Once we were able to establish rapport, not only with our community, luckily our mediation center has been around since the 80s, so we have a pretty good foundation in the community, and then working to build rapport and trust with our police. And initially they were like, well, you're going to go out there and you're going to get killed, or you're going to go hand all of these calls back to us. And we've been in operation for a year. We've had 0 injuries or issues that have happened. We do let people know those are bound to happen, just as they are in any profession. So we need to just get that right out on the table. They are bound to happen. It's what do we do and what are we trained to do if that does happen? I think later on I'm going to share a story. So we respond to things like neighbor disputes, roommate troubles, people in crises, well checks, disorderly subjects, public intoxication. I'm going to miss call types, and my coworker back here can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm going to miss some call types. Anything to do with juveniles that aren't higher level felonies. Things like kids won't get up and go to school and people are calling police. Well, my kid's unruly, please take them. I don't want them anymore. Yeah, well, it kind of doesn't work like that. You got to keep them. But we try to find alternatives and really work through the crises. We are mediation based, meaning if you have any experience in mediation, it's not arbitration. It's really simply us providing a safe space for people to have conversation that they may not otherwise have. We deal with quality of life issues. In mediation, we say we move people, well, they move themselves. We don't move people. We provide space for people to move from that red, that self-absorbed, I can't get past what's going on, to that more self-determination, recognition, and so we call that going from red to blue. if you're a social worker, you know anything about the neurobiology of trauma, we're taking people from their survival brain to their logic brain. And until we get them to this logic piece, we're never going to be able to deal or work through some of those root challenges because they're not in a place where they can hear or where they can speak. So it's all about empowerment and voice and choice.
It's amazing. Can I ask you just one other question? And then I do want to ask you to tell that story. Everybody's now wondering about the story, so it's going to be a disappointment. Tell us a little bit about the training for the folks that are doing this.
Sure. So we initially started out with a 6 to 8 week little academy. It's now up to 12 weeks. And we're positioning this a little bit different for our next recruit class that comes through, which is super cool. But they receive a wealth of knowledge. We bring of course they do defensive tactics and situational awareness with our local police department and our VA police department. Just for you have to be aware of your surroundings at all times. You never know what's going to pop off, right? So that's important, but also mental health first aid, CPR, all of those basics, because you also never know. You could show up and you think that it may be a panic attack and they're having a heart attack. So you got to be prepared for those types of things as well. But we bring in all of our as many community resources that we can. So we focus on marginalized populations, our LGBTQ plus community, our people of color, immigrants, and refugee populations, those where English is a second language or maybe limited English proficiency at all. Trauma-informed care, trauma-informed approach, response, the neurobiology of trauma. We have people from those communities come in, our deaf and hard of hearing community and different communities come in and also teach our responders. We try to cover a plethora of things. All of our departments, because we do operate under the City of Dayton's umbrella, it is important too that all of our city departments know who we are and what we're doing so that they can utilize us, our housing department, public works, all of those, for any parking even, so they can utilize us for those types of things in place of police as well. So
thank you. So the story. So when we were talking, I asked you about, as I ask everybody working in this space, about alternative response, co-response, what's the relationship with the policing agency in your jurisdiction? And certainly one of the things we hear the most, I'm sure you all hear it all the time, is about the risk management of having alternative responders, of sending somebody other than police. And we're actually gonna have a panel, I think tomorrow, that Jessica Galuli is leading. Jessica is a sociology professor at Suffolk, but she once worked with the policing project, and so we will eternally claim her. And she was also a call taker, and she'll be leading that panel. But when I asked you that question, you had kind of a unusual story to tell, or maybe not an unusual story to tell, but really a profound one.
sure, when people, like if you're starting or wanting to start a program in your community, listen, people are going to come at you with all kinds of things. You're going to die out there. You're going to get killed. You're going to be stabbed. You're not going to. Okay, thank you. Thank you for all the positive encouragement, right? I'm trying to help the community out here. So just be aware those things are going to happen. But if you think about it from this perspective, health workers, housing workers, probation, children's services, victim services, we're all going into the communities unarmed in different capacities, right? This is just unique and different because it's a difference for policing. So we're changing the policing world that has been in the works for decades and things. So it's not something that's foreign and it's just different to policing, and that's okay. Change is very hard in our law enforcement community. If any of you have ever worked in law enforcement, I did back in the day, and it is very challenging to change. So that's when it's our job, as Ms. Aaliyah was saying, we got to get in there and establish that rapport and trust. So my partner, who's here today, we were out on a call last fall. It was a normal call, if you will, disorderly subject. In the dispatch instructions, it said, white male umbrella tattoo screaming in the front lawn. We got this, no problem, right? This is normal stuff. So my partner and I show up, we roll by the place, don't see anyone outside. That's not unusual. Sometimes people leave, no problem. We're asking people as we're walking up, hey, You seen anything? No, my garage was broken into, blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, we're not here for that. Hold on. Well, let's get to this first. So we go up to the home, and an older seasoned lady answered the door. She's calm as a cucumber. She's like, oh yeah, my husband's talking to him in the backyard. And when they say backyard, it's a different type of call, right? This could be disorderly, but we could have home invasion, B&E, trespassing, a slew of things. Okay, he's talking to him in the backyard. She's like, you want to go talk to him? Sure. She had to put her dog up. That's what we were concerned about at first. And as we walked in the home, there were a couple of red flags, like an empty gun holster. Keep that in mind. See some ammo on the counter. Probably keep that in mind. Not thinking. And I'm going to tell this story in a funny aspect. It's not actually funny, but I lighten things up. Okay. Just roll with me. So we come around the island of the kitchen, and I see a man holding another man at gunpoint. Look at my partner. He looks at me and I'm like, well, this is a little bit out of our control, but okay. First, you got to acknowledge the gun, right? Oh, you have a gun. Great. Okay. Give me just a moment. And I have my radio, and we let them know, hey, we're going to call for an officer. Hey, get on the radio. Hey, we need an officer, but I don't want anyone to freak out. We have to remain calm, right? And my first conversation with myself is, we have soccer tonight. That's it. And that's all. I cannot miss soccer. That's it. That's all. So we're going home. So I address, you have a gun. Okay, just a moment. Let me get an officer. Officer, dispatch, can you send an officer? In the meantime, we have to make sure that everybody's safe, right? And the man, he's a seasoned man. He turns around and he's like, help me. And my partner and I are like, oh, if only we could. We can't, that's not our position. I said, you're right. I want you to stay just as you are. Stay just like that. Do not move. And I'm telling the intruder, don't move. And so my partner and I, we ease the lady out onto the porch. I have to communicate with dispatch at some point that there's a gun, correct? But I'm trying not to get anyone to freak out. So I get onto the porch and I'm like, hey, there's one at gunpoint in the backyard. I know in that instance, I have about 12 seconds before the entire PD shows up. So I need to now make sure that the people know what's about to happen. So we have the lady on the porch. I go back in. I'm like, listen, the police are coming. They are going to come in hot, and they're going to give you rapid instructions. Do not move. Do everything they tell you to do. Okay. And he's still holding, and I'm telling the intruder, do not move because this is going to get ugly. And sure enough, within 12 seconds, I met the sergeant or whoever first was the first responder at the door. I have to also clarify who has the gun, because they don't have that information. Homeowner has the gun. They run in there 6, 8, 10, 12 deep. And it ended up the gentleman, the intruder, it took 4 officers to get him out of that backyard, because he's like, you're going to shoot me. You're going to shoot me either way. But we were able to defuse, bring everyone down. The police were able to do their piece. We followed up with the couple. They were a seasoned couple. So they, this was something that really shook up their world. And the intruder was like, these are my parents. This is my house. It was a whole disaster, but we were able to work through that situation. And I attribute that, number one, to the calmness of my partner and I, our ability to communicate and our ability to assess the situation and make instant decisions. And that's where that training piece comes in. That's vitally important. We ended up two follow-ups on this. My partner and I went back about a week later to check in with the folks. They were so grateful that we came back to check in. Like, that was so nice. Thank you for handling it so calmly. Sergeants and the street officers harass us from time to time. Like, you were so calm on the radio, you freaked out dispatch. And I'm like, I get paid to be calm. That's what we do. And then one of my responders just a couple of weeks ago was in the grocery store. I don't know how they got in a conversation with the cashier. And she's like, oh, I know Josh and Raven. And my coworker's like, what? And she's like, oh yeah, they were out there when my husband had a guy at gunpoint. They did amazing. We need more of that in our community. And to hear those types of feedback, people calling 911 back saying, I don't know who you sent, but they were great, kind of thing. That's why we do this, because we're making quality of life changes in our community. We are literally, and it may sound, people may think, oh, we are literally saving lives. Maybe not physically doing CPR and things, but we are saving lives and de-escalating situations in a manner that hasn't been done before.
Thank you. I think maybe the motto of the convening maybe should be, we need more of this. Ivy, so you were in the mayor's office in San Francisco, and I know because I was out riding with your street response teams, the work that they do around behavioral health, but you have embraced this idea of expansion into a lot of different directions. So feel free to start with the behavioral health part, which I found to be amazing. But I'm very curious to ask you to let folks know, what other kinds of things you're thinking about to do in terms of alternative response.
Thanks, Barry. So first, I wish that we had this mediation team in San Francisco. I mean, I would love to talk to you more about your training after. Yeah, but so we have a street crisis response team, and that was the very first alternative response model that we stood up. I think very similar to probably what a lot of you have also done, which is to deal with like the mental health crises, the behavioral health crises that happen in public spaces first. And partially it was, a political call because people would support that. That was something that we could also get the union, the police union, to actually agree to as well, because they don't want to do that work. They haven't wanted to do it. And so we were offering something that they also wanted to take us up on. So that's comprised of community paramedics, as well as peer advocates that go out and respond to all of the 800B calls, which is an adult and behavioral health crisis call. So we have 7 teams now that are 24/7, and they cover the whole city. So it's not enough. It definitely is not. And we are having a hard time recruiting and hiring folks for our teams. A lot of people, I think, are facing the same issue. But that's also the opportunity, because police are also having a really hard time hiring and recruiting. And so that is kind of the angle that we have taken with the POA and with the public, is that, the hiring crunch is not going away anytime soon. We are over 500 officers down. So if you want a response, and if police are going to be used as the limited and valuable resource for very unique situations that we all agree is the trajectory here, then let's think about what else is possible. And so that approach is not just about setting up alternative teams. It is about, for example, embedding a clinician at dispatch. So at the point of the call taking, right, and the decision making, that we have clinicians there that can tell folks, you know what, this is not a situation where you need to send an armed officer. You will actually make it worse. Let's go this direction, instead. We are actually in the process of, and we just launched this team this past Tuesday. That's called the HEART team, which is attempting to be a mediation model. And that's to address some of the quality of life and folks that are unsheltered and creating disturbances that are scaring people, but does not require an armed response. Because the question that I think we are trying to get everyone to answer and think about in San Francisco is this a scenario where you can envision that an arrest is necessary? Because if it's not, then police are not the right tool for this situation. At the same time, we're trying to balance, how do we make sure that the community policing aspect, that the community relationships that individuals have with police officers in their neighborhoods, that we're not eradicating that? Because we don't want the police to be this tool that is only deployed for situations involving violence. Right? I mean, because then we are perpetuating this idea of like warriors out there versus guardians or peacemakers. And that's what we need. We need peacemakers more than anything else. So this approach is, so again, it's models of response, but it's also civilianizing our police department, because they are not going anywhere anytime soon. So that means we are amping up all of the different civilian hiring that we're doing in the department, police services aides and that sort of thing, as well as retired officers, actually, who come back as civilians. So we also have that hiring kind of push going on. And the entire purpose of this is really to make sure that everyone from our city workers to our police officers to residents are all engaged in the same exercise that we are, right? That we want to not just reduce unnecessary interactions between armed officers and people. We also want to reduce the toxicity of this act of policing on the people that are doing it. So we are not trying to recreate traditional policing, but just with different players, because that doesn't work. And we just had a situation in San Francisco, I think, that really speaks to this, which is the murder of the homicide of Banco Brown, who, he was a young man, went into a Walgreens, was trying to take some food and drinks that he didn't pay for. And we had another young man of color, 2 Black men, who was the security guard. And so, the end result of that interaction was the guard shooting and killing Banco Brown. And the question, people were up in arms about this, as they should be. But at the same, and they were calling for prosecution of the guard. That was one of the main demands of advocates, and it still is. But I think what was missing in that whole conversation was the fact that we are using people of color to police right now other people of color. And that's what can't happen. We can't recreate that. So that's why I think we are really pushing this idea. And Catherine, my colleague, has the hardest job because she is the one that has to get other city departments to step up. And she hopefully will if you have a chance, talk to her about her rooster story, because there is a rooster. There is a rooster in one neighborhood, a wealthy neighborhood in San Francisco. And the neighbors are calling constantly for the police. And so, first of all,
yes, it makes noise in the morning.
Yeah. But what do you want the police to do? Right? There is no thinking about what happens when the police go out. You want the police to arrest this rooster? Do you want them to shoot the rooster? What is the scenario that you all are thinking of? And our animal care and control department does not want to engage. They do not want to be the ones to go out there because no one wants to be the bad guy. It's so much easier, right, to not be that. So anyways, let me stop there.
You wandered into the rooster. So though, I learned that the NYPD has an entire bee unit. So you maybe need a rooster unit in San Francisco, the alternative rooster response. One thing I'll just point out, because I walked with the retired police officers who were now walking as community service officers. And kind of the most interesting thing that they told me was how much they loved not being the police, how much they loved walking in the neighborhoods that had been their lives and talking to people and engaging with them and helping solve problems. And they obviously had good ties to the PD if they needed to, but that they were relieved not to have to be doing that kind of policing. It was really fascinating. I want to be conscious of time, and you actually opened up the door to what I want to ask Christy next, but I do want to ask you, you have kind of a parable or a motto or a rule about how to bring the community, and this is important, right? I mean, I'm sure all of you are experiencing this, which is you have to bring your communities on board with what you're doing, because so many people want the police sent. I mean, we've trained an entire country to think that they call 3 digits and a police officer arrives. And so, we need to wean them of that. And you have a principle about that I think is worth sharing.
Okay, so I have 3 kids, and this is something that I feel like we've taught our kids starting from kindergarten. And it's you treat people the way you want to be treated, So that is what we want San Franciscans to learn again, is how do you treat people? We don't talk, people are so angry. And I don't know if this is happening in your community or not, but I feel like COVID exacerbated all of that. Trump exacerbated all of that. And people don't know how to treat people well anymore. It escalates so quickly. And so actually one brainstorming idea that we were thinking about as part of this alternatives work is, why do we not require that all city workers be trained on de-escalation skills, because it's a skill. It is not like something that you just, pick up, right? So why is that training not mandatory? I mean, we make sexual harassment training mandatory, public records requests mandatory. So, but this is so key. Why do we not do that? And start there and then like move to the school district, and continue. So anyways, it's just an idea, but.
Ideas are what we're about. So Christy, I think one of the concerns that I bet everyone in the room has, I know you have, is that we not recreate the problems that policing suffers from as we move into alternative response. And I was wandering down the street thinking about an article, because that's what law professors do. And the first sentence of it was something like, the police are locked in their history. And I think that's so true. In fact, if I could just interrupt the question to you, Dad, the question I kind of want to ask everybody is, if you were designing, and you are designing policing from the start, if we didn't have police at all, and you had to look at the functions that get served and think about what you would design, which part of what is police today is what we would have? Or would it look just dramatically different? And so that's a question I threw out for your coffee break here in a little bit. But Christy, what are the things we need to be worried about that we make sure we don't recreate? Like what, as you I know, or as I am just overtaken with how amazing this is, what do you worry about?
Well, what I've seen happen, which is that we forget that it's not just the police that are steeped in their history, but this country that's steeped in its history. And that we like to believe, it's convenient to believe that the police have a monopoly on institutionalized racism and on punitive treatment and on carceral thinking, but they don't. More people are killed by bias in the medical care system every year than by policing. I don't say that to be an apologist for police in any way, shape, or form. I say it because I am very concerned that as we create these new systems, if we don't dismantle the logic that informs them, we will absolutely repeat the same harms. I have seen policing that is very, very caring. I have seen non-policing and social work that is very, very callous. So we have to ensure that we take a different approach, that we can move away from a carceral thinking, from a punitive thinking, and thinking about care and support. And I think that's what everyone up here has been talking about. If we don't, and Derricka Purnell, the abolitionist writer, she talks about how she would rather see a police officer at her door than a social worker at her door, because social workers have done her family more harm than police ever have. And again, I don't say that to say that, we should all just be reinvesting in police. Obviously, that's not the point. The point is that unless we confront the logic that led policing to be what it is, we will absolutely replicate that same logic, complete with guns, in these other types of responses. So we absolutely have to confront that and be very intentional about what we're doing and why we're doing it. And that part of this has to be about taking a different approach to caging people, a different approach to responding to harm and to hurt and to pain with punitiveness rather than with healing. Accountability for sure, but with an emphasis on healing and care for our communities.
Thank you. So I'm going to do a very much of a speed round, because I deeply believe that when there's time for questions, there's really time for questions. And so I'd like to save about 30% of this panel for questions from all of you. And I'm guessing that there are microphones that are going to move around the room and all that. But I want to do a speed round, which is to ask everybody to tell us, and I know I told them this last night and people are frustrated, but the one thing you would tell people who are trying to start an alternative response program, what's the one piece of advice you would give? And the frustration is because people have oceans of advice they would like to give, and I understand that, but you got to pick one thing. So let's just quickly move down the line, and then we're going to open it up to all of you. Raven, you want to go first?
Do it. Do it.
Yay.
Do it.
Yay.
It's short and sweet, right? Put the little swoosh up there too. Just do it. That's it. That's really my advice. Do it. Yeah, it's scary. Yeah, you don't know who you're going to get at the table. You don't know who's going to say yes, who's going to no, who's going to say no, who's going to like you and not like you. Wash all that out. You're creating a bigger picture. And if you could keep that big picture in mind while still keeping in mind the players that need to be at the table, do it.
Thank you. That's great. Ivy, top that.
Yeah, no, I cannot. But what I would say is you all have to answer to, your governments, your communities back home. And so I think for what I would say is you have to think about today as well as tomorrow, right? So like you are building a team to respond, but that means you have to do that at the same time that you are continuing your criminal legal system reforms, your policing reforms. Like it's not enough to just stand up the one alternative. So it's today and tomorrow, because you're going to have to prove, like you're going to have to show proof of concept to people to win them over. And then stick to it because it's political. I mean, right? So that's the reality, is like this pendulum has swung, you know, post 2020, it is not the same. Like the will to do something is not the same. So, you know, find your people and like put that stake in the ground really deep, because people will try to remove it.
Okay, so just do it. And while you're dreaming about the future and building the future, be alert to today and manage that. Aaliyah?
I would just follow up by saying that your work with other systems and community partners is going to be critical. There's no way that you can avoid that. So, because everyone has to be going in the same direction at the same time. So you have to make that investment. That's not something that you can kind of fall back on. Truly collaborate. Those interrelationships are what will help to sustain you. You want to be culturally and structurally humble so that you can have a collective impact. This work will be probably the hardest work that you will ever do, but the fulfillment and the gratification make it well worth it. The journey is not cut and dry. And if you have not gotten over yourself yet, you will when you begin this work.
I heard get over yourself. But I also heard to engage with your community partners and your governmental partners and bring them along. And Christy?
Yeah, I co-chaired the DC Police Reform Commission, and we called our report Decentering the Police for Improved Public Safety. And I think that despite the name of this conference, I think that's what would be my advice, to work towards a future where these types of first response is not seen as alternative. We need to move away from that idea, because otherwise, if we tend to see this as a budget saving item and it gets cut, or sort of an adjunct, nice add-on, then we need to start seeing the police as one of many tools, and perhaps not the predominant one in any given situation. So moving away from this idea that these are alternatives, I think, is an important thing. It won't happen immediately, but that should be the future we're seeking.
When I first started to write to funders about this, and by the way, thank you to all the funders who are here to hear us write. This work doesn't happen without all of you right now, though I firmly believe that it is government's job to pick up the baton at the right point. I had this goofy image in my head. It's maudlin and goofy, so forgive me, but it was vehicles that didn't say police on them, said in italics, kind of like this in capital letters, first. And the motto was, we're here to help. And I really hope that that's the world we can move to, though I'm equally interested in how then we begin to think about traditional police and policing in a world in which this is not an alternative, but this is first response. I first want to thank all of you for being here yet again. And I already knew y'all were awesome, but that was awesome. So thank you.